Can you imagine standing in the middle of a supermarket, basket full of vegetables and a box of headache pills, and the cashier looks at you with a disapproving expression and says, "Your card was declined." Not a technical error, not a mistake. The only son you sacrificed your whole life to raise had silently removed your name from your own savings account. He thought you would beg on your knees. He was wrong. If you want to know how a 65-year-old woman got it all back, hit like, comment the city you're viewing from so I know how far my story has progressed, and follow along to the end. I want to tell you exactly how it felt. Not the cleaned up version. Not the version where I say I handled it with grace and dignity from the very first moment, because that would be a lie, and you deserve better than a lie. Here's the truth. I was standing in the checkout line at Merrifield Grocery on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and I was buying a head of cabbage, a small bag of rice, a bottle of ibuprofen, and one container of plain yogurt. 4 items. That was what I could afford that week, or thought I could. The woman ahead of me was unloading a full cart: chips, soda, 2 kinds of cheese, a rotisserie chicken still warm in its plastic shell, and I remember thinking that I used to shop like that. Not long ago. I used to fill a cart without counting. The cashier was a young woman, maybe 22, with a name tag that said Brianna in bright purple letters. She had the kind of tired politeness you see in people who have been on their feet since 7 in the morning. She scanned my 4 items without looking at me, told me the total, $11.40, and I slid my card through the reader the way I had done 10,000 times before. The machine beeped. Not the good beep. The other one. Brianna glanced at the screen. "Says declined," she said, not unkindly. "You want to try again?" "There must be a mistake," I told her. "I have money in that account." I tried again. Same beep, same word on the screen. Declined. The man behind me exhaled loudly. Someone else shifted their weight. I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck, and my fingers went a little numb the way they do when something goes wrong that your body understands before your brain does. I asked Brianna if she could hold my items for a few minutes. She said sure, in the voice of someone who doubted I was coming back. I walked to the corner of the store near the pharmacy display, and I called the bank's automated line. I punched in my account number, which I have had for 31 years, and I listened to the recording read back my current balance, $4.17. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear and the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and I made myself listen to that number 2 more times to make sure I had heard it correctly. $4.17. 3 weeks ago, that account had held $11,200. My pension disbursement, my savings from 2 years of careful scrimping, and the small amount left from selling my late husband Gerald's truck the previous spring. Not a fortune, but mine. Every dollar of it earned and carefully protected. $4.17. I did not cry in that store. I want you to know that. I am 65 years old and I have buried a husband and survived a cancer scare and raised a son on my own for the last 12 years of his childhood. And there have been moments that broke me open completely, moments I could not get off the bathroom floor. But standing in Merrifield Grocery with the ibuprofen I couldn't pay for and a stranger breathing impatiently behind me, I did not cry. I put my phone in my pocket, I walked to the door, I got in my car, and then I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes and tried to understand what had happened to my life. My name is Rosemary Hale. I was born in Clover Falls, Tennessee, and I have lived in the same town, Delwood, Ohio, for 38 years. I worked as a medical billing specialist for most of my adult life. Not glamorous work, not the kind of job people ask you about at dinner parties, but steady, honest work that required attention and patience and a certain kind of quiet precision I happened to be good at. Gerald Hale was my husband for 26 years. He was an electrician, a decent man, a little stubborn, but he loved me in the simple way that good men love, but not with speeches or grand gestures, but with consistent presence. He was there. Every day, he was there. He died of a heart attack at 59, 7 years ago now, and I have missed him every single day since. Ethan is our son. He is 38 years old, 6 feet tall, with Gerald's jawline and my stubbornness and a charm he developed somewhere along the way that neither of us quite taught him. He has a good job, sales director at a regional software company, and an apartment in the nicer part of Columbus, about 90 minutes from Delwood. He has never been married, though there have been women. He drives a car that costs more than I made in 2 years at the billing office. I am telling you these things because I want you to understand. I did not raise a disadvantaged child. I did not fail him. I gave him every single thing I had. The private tutoring in 8th grade when his math grades were slipping. The used car when he turned 17, because I didn't want him riding the bus in the dark in winter. The 4 years of college, paid for with Gerald's life insurance money, and every dollar I could scrounge on top of it. The security deposit on his first apartment, the suit I bought him for his first real job interview, the $500 I quietly transferred to his account twice when he said he was between paychecks and couldn't cover his rent. $500 twice, while I was on a budget that did not allow for restaurants. I am not saying this to make him a villain, not yet. I'm saying it because when you understand what I gave, you begin to understand what it meant when I stood in that parking lot and realized it had all been taken. When I got home, I called the bank directly, spoke to a real person, a man named David, who was careful and professional, and who told me, after some searching, that the primary account holder, my son, Ethan Hale, who I had added to the account years ago so he could help me manage bills after Gerald died, had removed my access 4 days earlier. Not the money. He had removed me. He changed the account to sole ownership, David told me gently, which, as a joint account holder, he was permitted to do. He took my pension money, I said. A pause. The funds in the account at the time of the change of ownership transferred to... He took my pension money, I said again. My voice was very quiet. David was quiet too for a moment. Then he said, I'd strongly recommend you speak with someone in our fraud and disputes department, and possibly consult with a legal professional. I thanked him and hung up. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Ethan had done his homework 100 times, where we ate Christmas dinners, where Gerald and I had our worst fight and our best reconciliation, and I stared at the wood grain and I tried to understand why. Not how. I understood how. I had trusted him. I had added him to the account because I thought that was what families did, sharing access, helping each other. I had been recovering from a knee surgery 2 years ago, and he'd offered to help manage the account while I was on bed rest, make sure the automatic payments went through, and I had said yes because of course I had, because he was my son. The why was harder. I picked up my phone. I almost called him. My finger hovered over his name in my contacts. Ethan. Just the single word, no emoji, no designation, just his name. And I sat there for a long moment. Then I put the phone down. Because here is what I already knew, even in those first stunned hours. He was waiting. Wherever he was, in that Columbus apartment with the leather furniture and the view of the skyline, he was waiting for my call. Waiting for me to beg. That was the plan. That was the entire point of what he had done. Not just to take the money, but to create a condition in which I would have no choice but to come to him. Humbled, dependent, asking. I had spent 38 years being someone's mother. I had bent myself into shapes that hurt me just to keep the peace, just to keep him close. And this was his calculation. That I would bend again, that I would call him, voice shaking, and say, please, Ethan, I don't understand. What did I do? Please help me. I went to bed that night hungry because the yogurt and the cabbage and the rice were still sitting at a register at Merrifield Grocery, and I stared at the ceiling for 3 hours, and I made myself a promise. I would not call him, not once, not ever, to beg. Whatever happened next, it would not begin with me on my knees. The first week was hard in ways I don't know how to describe without sounding pathetic. And I am past the age of worrying about sounding pathetic, so I will just tell you. I had $42 in my wallet when I discovered the account had been emptied. A Social Security payment was due in 18 days, and I had a small checking account, separate, one I had never added Ethan to, which in retrospect was either wisdom or luck, with $311 in it. That was everything. I ate carefully, very carefully. I went through my cupboards and found canned beans, half a bag of pasta, some lentils I had bought months ago and never gotten around to using, a tin of sardines I had been avoiding. I made a list of what I needed, actual medicine, actual necessities, and I spent $80 of the $300 in the first 5 days on things I could not do without. The gas bill was due. I called and asked for an extension, which was humiliating in a very specific way. The way that anything involving explaining your poverty to a stranger on the phone is humiliating. The woman gave me 10 days. My neighbor Helen Brooks brought over a casserole on Thursday. She did not ask why I looked thinner than usual. She just knocked on my door and handed it over and said, "I made too much. Eat what you want and throw away the rest." Helen is 71 and a retired school teacher, and she has a way of offering help that does not feel like charity, which is a rare and valuable skill. I thanked her and then went inside and cried for the first time since the grocery store. Not because of the casserole, because someone had been kind to me, and I hadn't realized until that moment how afraid I was that kindness was over, that I had used up my supply of it in this life, that what was left was just the counting of cans in a cupboard and the waiting for a son who had decided his mother was worth less than nothing. I did not tell Helen what Ethan had done. Not yet. I wasn't ready to say it out loud. Yes. The second week was when the memories started coming back. That's the thing about trauma, and I know that word gets used for everything now, overused until it's lost weight, but I'm using it correctly here, I think. It doesn't always hit you immediately. Sometimes it waits until the adrenaline is gone and the shock has worn off, and you're sitting alone with a bowl of lentil soup and $300 to your name, and then it comes. All at once. I remembered Ethan's 35th birthday. I had made his favorite dinner, pot roast with the caramelized carrots the way Gerald used to do it, biscuits from scratch, a chocolate layer cake that took me most of the afternoon. I had driven to Columbus, an hour and a half on the highway with a pot wrapped in towels to keep it warm, and I had set everything up on his kitchen counter. He had arrived home from work 2 hours late without calling. He'd looked at the table, looked at me, and said, "Mom, you know I'm trying to eat clean right now, right? This is like 1,000 calories." He'd eaten a piece of cake, not the pot roast, just the cake, and then taken a phone call in the other room that lasted 40 minutes. I drove home at 10 o'clock with most of the pot roast still in the pan. I had told myself he was stressed. New promotion, new pressure, that was all. I had rewashed the pan at home and thought, he's busy, he's working hard. That's what success looks like from the inside. I remembered his 36th birthday, which I spent in a hospital. Not my hospital. My sister Darlene, in Cincinnati, who had emergency gallbladder surgery that week. I called Ethan from the waiting room and left a message saying I was sorry I couldn't be there, that I hoped he was having a good day, that I loved him. He didn't call back for 9 days. When he did, he mentioned in passing that he'd had a pretty lousy birthday because he'd had to celebrate alone. I said I was sorry. I apologized. I sat there and apologized to my son for being at my sister's bedside instead of his kitchen. I remembered a phone call from about 8 months ago, before all of this started. Or before I could see it starting anyway. I'd had a bad cold that had settled into my chest, and I'd been alone for 5 days, not sick enough for the hospital, but sick enough to be miserable, coughing through the nights and barely eating. I called Ethan on the 3rd day, not for money, not for anything dramatic, just to hear his voice, to have someone to talk to. "Mom, I really can't talk right now. I'm in the middle of something." "Okay," I said, I'll call you back." He did not call me back. Not that day, not the next. I called him again on day 5 and he picked up and seemed surprised to learn I'd still been sick. He said, "You should have called me sooner." I said I had. A small silence. Then he changed the subject. I was sitting with my bowl of soup remembering all of this, and here is what hit me like a closed fist. He hadn't forgotten. That was the story I had told myself for years. That Ethan was distracted, busy, overwhelmed, that he forgot my birthday not because he didn't care, but because he was busy, that he didn't visit during my knee surgery because he had a big work project, that he didn't call back when I was sick because he was genuinely swamped. I had assembled an elaborate defense for him out of nothing but wishful thinking and maternal desperation. But people who forget birthdays don't also drain their mother's pension account. People who are merely distracted don't study the balance of a joint account and wait for the right moment to cut off access. He had not forgotten me. He had looked at me, clearly and deliberately, and decided I was a resource that had been sufficiently used up. He had taken everything he could extract, and he had discarded what was left. That is not forgetfulness. That is a choice. And sitting in my kitchen with my soup and my 32 remaining dollars, I finally let myself know what I had known for years and refused to admit. My son did not love me. He was capable of using me. He was capable of charm and occasional warmth and saying the right things at Christmas. But what I had been calling love for all these years was something else entirely. Something that looked like love from the outside, from a distance, if you squinted hard enough and wanted badly enough to see it. I am 65 years old, and I had to sit in my kitchen with an empty bank account to finally understand that. The grief of it is hard to put into words. It is one thing to lose a person. It is another thing entirely to look backward over decades and realize the person you were grieving for was never quite there to begin with. On day 11, Helen knocked again. This time, she didn't have a casserole. She had a man with her. He was tall, maybe early 50s, with gray at his temples and a kind face that carried some old sadness behind the eyes. He was wearing a good coat, not flashy, just well-made. And he was holding a bag from the deli down on Marsden Street, the nice one, with the good soup. "Rosemary," Helen said carefully. "Do you remember Nathan Carter?" I looked at him for a moment. Something stirred. A much younger face, thinner, the same eyes but without the gray. A cold January morning, years and years back, outside the church hall on Birch Avenue when it was still used as a community center. He had been standing in line for the free lunch they offered on Thursdays in winter, and he had been shaking, not just from the cold but from something worse. He couldn't have been more than 23. I had given him $20. I remember it wasn't even a decision, exactly. I'd had my wallet out for something else, and I saw him and I handed it over, and he'd looked at me like I had handed him something worth far more than $20. He'd tried to give it back. I wouldn't let him. I hadn't thought about that morning in 15 years. "Nathan," I said slowly. He nodded. "Ms. Hale." His voice was steady, but there was something in his face that made my chest hurt. "Helen called me. She said she was worried about you." He paused. "I've been worried too. I should have called sooner. I've been back in Delwood for 2 years now, and I kept meaning to find you and say what I needed to say, and I kept putting it off, and then Helen called and—" He stopped himself, held out the bag. "I brought soup, and I need to talk to you if you're willing." I stepped back from the door and let them both inside. Nathan Carter had not had an easy life after that winter morning on Birch Avenue. I learned this over the next hour, sitting at my kitchen table with soup I actually ate and tea Helen made without asking. His mother had been sick, his family broke, and he had spent several years after that doing work he wasn't proud of before someone gave him a chance at an entry-level position at a financial firm in Cleveland. He had worked himself up. He was now, at 52, a partner in a financial consulting firm with offices in 3 cities. He donated a third of his income every year to a shelter that served people in exactly the position he'd been in at 23. He had been looking for me for 2 years. "You don't owe me anything," I said at one point, because it needed to be said. "I know that," he said, "but I owe myself the chance to try." Helen had told him what she knew, which wasn't much. Just that something had happened with my finances, that I was struggling, that I wasn't the kind of person who would ask for help even if I were drowning. Which was fair. That was exactly the kind of person I was. Nathan asked me to tell him everything, so I did. Every detail, from the grocery store to David at the bank to the $4.17. I watched his face change as I talked, not with pity, but with something harder and more focused, the look of a person calculating. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Rosemary, what Ethan did, removing your name from a joint account and retaining funds you contributed, there are very strong grounds for legal action. What he did may constitute financial elder abuse under Ohio state law." I had never heard that phrase applied to myself. Elder abuse. It landed strangely. I was the elder. Ethan was the abuser. "I know a very good attorney," Nathan said. "Her name is Patricia Voss. She handles elder law and financial fraud, and she is very, very good at what she does." He paused. "I'd like to connect you with her, with your permission. No cost to you up front. She works on contingency for cases like this, and I'll cover whatever the contingency doesn't." "Nathan, let me." he said quietly. Please. Helen was watching me across the table with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for someone else to do the right thing. I thought about Ethan sitting in Columbus, waiting for my desperate phone call. I thought about my $4 bank balance. I thought about the pot roast I drove an hour and a half to make for a son who looked at it and said too many calories. All right, I said. And that was the moment, though I didn't fully understand it yet, when I stopped surviving and started fighting back. That night, after Helen and Nathan had gone, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without turning on the TV or picking up a book. I just sat with myself in the quiet of my own house, and I thought about the 65 years I had lived. I had not always been good. I had been impatient with Gerald sometimes, cruel in the small ways that long marriages allow. I had made mistakes with Ethan too. I had probably made him the center of too much, probably let him see that his needs mattered more than mine too early and too consistently. I had taught him, without meaning to, that I had no needs worth protecting. That was on me. I was not a perfect mother, but I had loved him. Every year, every stupid sacrifice, every apology I did not owe, all of it had come from love. Maybe not always wise love, but real love. The kind that costs something. He had taken that love, and he had taken my money, and he had sat back and waited for me to fold. I was 65 years old, and I had a Social Security check coming in a week and a half, and I had a contact in my phone for an attorney named Patricia Voss, and I had a neighbor who cared about me, and a man who had driven 2 hours to bring me soup because of something I did once without thinking. I was not finished. I thought I needed to say that to myself clearly, out loud in the quiet kitchen. I was not finished. I turned off the kitchen light, and I went to bed, and I slept. For the first time in 11 days, without lying awake counting my remaining dollars in the dark. Yet, 3 days later I met Patricia Voss. She was not what I expected. I had imagined someone corporate and distant, the kind of lawyer who makes you feel like a case number. Patricia was in her mid-40s with reading glasses that she kept pushing up her nose and a desk so covered in papers that it seemed structurally precarious. Her office was small and warm and smelled like the takeout coffee she was still working through when we sat down. She listened to me the same way Nathan had, completely, without interrupting. She took notes in a cramped handwriting that I couldn't have read upside down if I'd tried. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and tapped her pen against her notepad twice. "Tell me about the joint account," she said. "When was Ethan added to it? Do you still have the original account documentation?" I did. I had always been meticulous about paperwork. Billing work does that to you. And I had a filing cabinet at home where I kept every financial document I'd accumulated in 30 years. Gerald had teased me about it. He called it my paper bunker. "Good," Patricia said. "That matters a lot." She leaned forward. "Here's what I need you to understand first. Ohio has specific statutes addressing financial exploitation of elderly adults. Depending on the documentation, what your son did may be classified as theft, conversion of funds, or financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The civil remedies can be significant. We're not just talking about recovering what was taken. We're talking about potential treble damages and attorney's fees." I did not know what treble damages meant. She explained it. 3 times the actual damages, in certain cases. "Rosemary," she said, setting down her pen, "I want to be honest with you. Cases involving family financial exploitation can be complicated because courts are sometimes reluctant to impose harsh consequences on a child for actions against a parent. And your son's attorney, if he hires a good one, will try to argue that the funds in a joint account were jointly owned and he had every right to them." "They were my pension," I said. "I know, and we can document that, but I want you prepared for a fight, not a quick resolution." She met my eyes. "Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the grocery store. I thought about Brianna with her name tag and the beep of the card reader and the heat crawling up the back of my neck. I thought about 38 years of excuses I had made for my son. "Yes," I said. Patricia Voss picked up her pen again, and she smiled. Not a warm smile exactly, but the kind of smile that belongs to someone who is very good at their job and is about to prove it. "All right," she said. "Then let's start." Patricia Voss was not the kind of attorney who made promises she couldn't keep, and she had warned me from the start that building a case takes time. What she had not warned me about, maybe because she thought I understood, or maybe because some things you can only know by living through them, was how much it would cost me to sit still and wait while the machinery of legal process moved at its own pace. The waiting was its own kind of damage. Every quiet morning in my kitchen, every night I stretched a pot of beans across 2 meals, every time I looked at my phone and didn't call my son, all of it accumulated into a weight I carried around without quite being able to set down. But the waiting also gave me something I hadn't expected. It gave me time to remember. Patricia had asked me, at the end of our first meeting, to write down every financial transaction I could recall Ethan being involved in over the past 5 years. Every request for money, every transfer, every time he'd had access to any account of mine. "Don't edit yourself," she'd said, pushing her glasses up. "Don't decide what's relevant and what isn't. Just write it down. All of it. Let me sort through it." So I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and I wrote. And writing it down, forcing myself to put dates and amounts and circumstances into actual words, was, I don't have a cleaner way to say this, like performing surgery on myself without anesthesia. Every memory I recorded was something I had told myself wasn't a big deal. Every entry on that legal pad was a thing I had minimized, explained away, or simply refused to look at directly. There was the $700 I had transferred to him in the spring of the year Gerald died, when Ethan said he needed help with car repairs. He had called me from the driveway of a dealership, which I only understood later. The car he bought that month was not a repair. It was a trade-in upgrade. There were the grocery runs I had paid for during his visits, not unusual, a mother feeds her son, but these had gone on long past the point where he couldn't have fed himself, and they had escalated. The last time he visited, 8 months ago, I had spent over $200 at the store for a 3-day stay. He had a refrigerator full of food when he left. I had $34 until my next paycheck, and I had felt glad he had eaten well. There was the time he asked me, casually, over the phone, whether I had thought about updating my will. He said it in a helpful voice. The voice he used when he was pretending concern was the motive. He said he wanted to make sure everything was organized for me, that he could help me find an attorney, that it would be a relief to have it sorted. I had said I'd think about it, and then not thought about it, because something about the conversation made me uncomfortable, and I had learned over many years to back away from the things that made me uncomfortable, rather than move toward them and find out why. I wrote all of it down. 4 pages, front and back, small handwriting. When I brought it to Patricia's office, she read through the whole thing without speaking. Her coffee sat untouched and went cold. When she finished, she put the pages down flat on the desk and looked at me over her glasses with an expression that was not quite pity, but was in the neighborhood. "Rosemary," she said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "All right. Did Ethan ever have access to any other accounts? Anything beyond the joint savings account?" And that is when I told her about the investment account. I had opened it 11 years ago, shortly after Gerald died, on the recommendation of the financial advisor at our bank at the time. A modest portfolio, mostly conservative bonds and a few mutual funds, not anything complicated, but it had grown slowly and steadily over the years into something meaningful. I had never touched the principal. That account was my real safety net, my true backup, the thing I did not let myself think about too often, because thinking about it felt like spending it. I had added Ethan as a beneficiary, not as a joint holder. I was careful about that, or I thought I was. What I had not understood, what I had not checked in several years because I trusted the account was structured the way I'd set it up, was that at some point, during a phone call with the financial services firm in which Ethan had represented himself as my authorized agent, the beneficiary designation had been expanded to include account access rights. Patricia's expression when I told her this was the expression of someone receiving information they were afraid they might receive. "When did this happen?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "I didn't know it had happened until right now, telling you." She was already reaching for her phone. The next 72 hours were a particular kind of hell. Patricia worked fast once she had a clear target. She was on the phone with the financial services firm the same afternoon, and by the following morning she had obtained emergency legal hold on any further transactions from the investment account pending review. But the damage assessment, the full accounting of what had actually been moved and when, took 3 days of document requests and secure transfers and phone calls that Patricia made me present so that I could authorize the disclosures. What the record showed was this. Over the preceding 14 months, Ethan had made 11 withdrawals from my investment account totaling just over $43,000. The largest single transfer was $12,000, made 8 weeks before he removed me from the savings account, as if he'd known what was coming and had been emptying the larger vessel first. The smallest was $800, taken on a Thursday in February, the same week I had mentioned to him that I wasn't feeling well and had missed 2 days of work. He had heard me say I was sick and then logged into my account and taken $800. I sat in Patricia's office and read through the transaction records twice, and my hands were very still in my lap, and I did not cry. I had moved past the crying phase into something quieter and harder, something that lived in my chest like a stone that had replaced the place where something softer used to be. $43,000, I said. My voice sounded strange to me, flat. Plus the $11,000 from the savings account. Yes, Patricia said. She was watching me carefully. $54,000, I said. She nodded. I thought about my knee surgery 18 months ago. I had skipped the physical therapy my doctor recommended because I couldn't justify the copays. I had limped for 6 months longer than I should have, doing exercises I looked up on the internet in my living room because I couldn't afford the professional sessions, all while my son was taking money out of my account in installments. I need a minute, I told Patricia. Take all the time you need. I stood up and walked to the window of her small office, which looked out onto a side street and a parking lot and a bare-branched tree that had dropped all its leaves. I stood there and I breathed carefully. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way they'd taught me after Gerald died when the panic attacks were bad. Then I turned around and I said, "What do we do next?" What came next was Nathan. He called me that evening. Not intrusively, he always asked first if I had time to talk, which was a small thing that meant more to me than I knew how to say. I told him what Patricia had found. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is not emptiness, but thinking. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Not with the case. With me." "I don't know," I said honestly. "I keep waiting to feel something big. Rage, maybe. What I actually feel is tired." "That makes sense," he said. "Rage takes energy. You've been surviving on very little energy for weeks." I hadn't thought of it that way. "Nathan," I said, "why are you doing all of this? You don't owe me. You said you knew you didn't owe me." He was quiet again, but differently. "Do you know what I was thinking about on that Thursday morning when you gave me $20? He asked. "No." I had been turned down for the 3rd time that week for a day labor job. I hadn't eaten since the day before. And I had decided, standing in that line, that if one more thing went wrong, I was done. A pause. I don't mean I was going to leave town. I mean I was done trying. I had decided I was going to stop. Another pause, slower. And then a woman I didn't know handed me $20 and said, "You look cold, get something warm to eat." And something about it, the way you said it, like it was the most normal thing in the world, like, of course you would do that. It made me think that maybe the world was not entirely what I thought it was. I did not know what to say to that. "So no," he said, "I don't owe you, but I am here because I want to be, and because some things matter, and you matter, and I'm not going anywhere." I had to set the phone down for a moment after that and just breathe. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. I knew it was from Ethan's attorney before I opened it because it was on legal letterhead from a Columbus firm I'd never heard of, and because my name was spelled correctly, Rosemary Jane Hale, in the formal way that only official documents use. I stood in my doorway with the morning cold coming in, and I read it once, and then I went inside and read it again at the table. The letter was, in the language of legal correspondence, a settlement offer. Ethan was offering to return $5,000, $5,000, out of $54,000, in exchange for my agreement to release all legal claims against him and sign a document stating that the financial transfers had been made with my full knowledge and consent. $5,000. And my signature on a lie. I want to tell you what happened to me when I read that letter, because I think it is important. I did not get angry immediately. Anger, real anger, doesn't always come fast. Not for me, not anymore. What came first was something else. It was grief, but a very specific kind of grief. The kind you feel when the last small hope you were carrying without realizing it finally gets extinguished. Because somewhere in me, buried under all the knowing, under the 4 pages of yellow legal pad evidence, under the cold fact of $54,000 drained out of my life in installments, there had still been a small, stubborn, foolish hope that Ethan would show up. Not with lawyers, not with a settlement offer that amounted to a slap and a demand for my silence. With something real, with recognition, with the sound of his voice saying, "Mom, I know what I did, and I am sorry." That letter closed the door on that hope. I called Patricia. "I got a letter from his attorney," I told her. "I got one too," she said. "What's your answer?" "No," I said. Not "I think no," or "probably no," or "let me think about it." Just no. Clean and certain, the way you answer a question when you already know. "Good," Patricia said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I'll draft our response today." She filed the formal complaint the following week. I won't pretend it wasn't frightening, even though it was the right thing. Signing my name to a legal document that named my son as a defendant in a financial exploitation case, there is a specific feeling that goes with that, a finality. You are saying, in the clearest possible language, this is not a family misunderstanding. This is a wrong that requires a remedy. And even when you know it's true, even when you have 4 pages of handwritten evidence and 14 months of transaction records, some part of you flinches. I signed it anyway. Patricia had told me Ethan would be formally served within a few days, and that we should expect his attorneys to respond quickly given the amount of money involved. What I had not fully prepared myself for was the phone call. He called me 2 days after he was served. Not his attorney, him, directly, from his cell phone, which still showed up in my phone as just Ethan with no emoji. It was 9:30 on a Friday night. I answered, "Mom." His voice was different. Not the casual dismissiveness I was used to, not the preoccupied half-attention he gave me when he called, which was rarely and always on his terms. This was something tighter, pressured. "What are you doing?" "I would think that's fairly clear," I said. "You're suing me." He said it like I had done something unreasonable, like I was the one who had upended something. "You took $54,000, Ethan. It was a joint account. The investment account was not a joint account. You changed your access level on that account without my knowledge, and you took $43,000 from it in 14 months. I had rehearsed none of this. It was just the truth, and the truth came out very steadily. And you did it while I was skipping physical therapy because I couldn't afford the copays, while I was eating canned beans and calling the gas company for extensions." Silence on the line. "Mom, I was going to pay it back." "Ethan." My voice was quiet, not angry, not tearful, just very, very quiet. "Don't." I was in a difficult spot financially. "Don't," I said again. "Don't tell me about your difficult spot. I know exactly what you spent that money on. Patricia has the records." More silence. Then a sound that might have been the beginning of something. An apology or an excuse, I couldn't tell yet. And then he said very quietly, "Can we just talk about this? Without attorneys?" And here's the moment I am most proud of, and also the moment that hurt the most. Because he sounded, in those few words, like he used to sound. Like my son. The one who came home from school with a B on a math test and stood in the kitchen doorway looking uncertain, waiting to be told it was going to be okay. The voice underneath all the years of learned carelessness. The original voice. I loved that voice. I had always loved that voice. I had spent a long time hoping it meant something it did not mean. "I'm going to let Patricia handle the communications from here," I said. "Call her office." And I hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after that. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel particularly strong. I felt the weight of everything the conversation had not been. The apology that didn't come. The acknowledgement that was replaced immediately by deflection. The offer to talk without attorneys. That was not an offer, to be honest, but an offer to find a way to make this go away quietly, on his terms, again. He had not changed. He was frightened now, which was different from changed. Frightened people who have not changed try to find softer ways to get what they want. I went and made myself a cup of tea, and I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the dark yard and the old oak tree Gerald had planted the year Ethan was born, and I thought about all the ways I had tried to keep that tree watered and fed and growing for 38 years, and how you cannot make a tree grow toward you if it has already decided to grow in another direction. Helen knocked at 9:45, which sounds intrusive but wasn't. She had a habit of knowing when things happened next door, some old woman radar that I had come to rely on more than I would ever admit to her directly. She came in, and I told her about the phone call, and she listened without making faces, which was what I needed. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think you scared him." I looked at her. "I think for his whole life," she said, "he has understood you as someone who would absorb whatever he did and keep going and never make him account for any of it. And now you have made him account for it, and he doesn't know what to do with that." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "That's not the same as him being sorry. But it means you did the right thing, because the right thing, sometimes, is the thing that scares people who were counting on you to stay quiet." I thought about that for a long time after she left. The right thing is sometimes the thing that scares people who were counting on you to stay quiet. I was 65 years old, and I had stayed quiet for a very long time. Not anymore. The case was filed, the records were gathered, and somewhere in Columbus my son was sitting with the understanding that his mother had stopped being someone he could afford to ignore. The hearing date was set for 6 weeks out. 6 weeks felt like a long time, but so had the last 38 years, and I had survived those. The 6 weeks before the hearing were not quiet weeks. I had expected a kind of suspended stillness, the waiting period before a verdict, the held breath before something breaks. What I got instead was an escalating series of pressures that came from directions I hadn't fully anticipated, and each one tested something different in me. The first came from Ethan's attorney, a man named Douglas Farrell, who sent Patricia a revised settlement offer 10 days after the complaint was filed. This time the number was higher, $15,000, still less than a third of what had been taken, and the conditions had multiplied. In addition to releasing all legal claims, I would be required to sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing me from discussing the matter with anyone, a statement acknowledging that all transfers had occurred within the normal scope of our family financial arrangements, and this was the one that made Patricia set the document down very carefully and look at me over her glasses, a letter to Ethan's employer confirming that no legal proceedings were currently active against him, to be used at his discretion. He was worried about his job. That last condition told me more about Ethan's current state of mind than anything else in the document. He wasn't trying to make things right. He was trying to manage the blast radius. The settlement offers were not about acknowledging what he'd done. They were about containing the damage to his own life, his own career, his own carefully constructed image as a successful man whose mother was proud of him from a comfortable distance. "My answer is still no," I told Patricia. She nodded like she'd expected nothing else. "Farrell is going to push harder," she said. "I want you prepared for that. He'll probably try to contact you directly at some point, or send someone who isn't technically his representative. It's a tactic. If anyone reaches out to you about this case, anyone at all, you tell me immediately and you say nothing in response." I said I understood. What Patricia had not predicted, and what I had not either, because I had not spoken to Ethan's circle in years, was the phone call from his friend Marcus Webb. Marcus had been Ethan's closest friend since college. I had met him a handful of times over the years at family holidays when Ethan still came home for those, and Marcus had always been polite to me in the surface way of young men who are performing courtesy rather than feeling it. He called me on a Tuesday morning, and he opened with Ms. Hale, "I hope you're well," which was so transparently preparatory that I almost said get to the point before he'd finished his sentence. "Ethan asked me to reach out," Marcus said. He's in a really bad place right now, Ms. Hale. I've never seen him this scared." "Marcus," I said, "did Ethan's attorney ask you to call me?" A pause. "No, Ethan did. He just wanted me to tell you that Marcus, I have been advised not to discuss the case with anyone outside of my legal counsel, so I'm going to have to end this call." I paused. And I want you to understand something. I don't say this with anger, but I have been scared for 8 weeks now. I have been scared while I was eating canned beans for dinner and calling my gas company for extensions and trying to figure out how to afford my prescriptions. What Ethan is feeling right now, I don't dismiss it, but it is a consequence of what he chose to do. Those are different things. Silence. Take care of yourself, Marcus, I said, and I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a moment after and noticed that my hands were not shaking. 2 months ago, they would have been. Something had shifted in me during those weeks. Some fundamental recalibration of where I drew the line between sympathy and surrender. I could still feel the thing that had always made me want to protect Ethan. It hadn't gone away, but now I could feel it and not obey it. Those were different things, too.
Yeah.
The week before the hearing, Patricia called me in for a preparation meeting that lasted 3 hours. She had assembled the complete financial record by then. Every transaction, every date, every account. Her paralegal had created a chronological exhibit that ran to 62 pages, documenting 14 months of withdrawals from the investment account cross-referenced with Ethan's known expenses during the same period. That cross-referencing was the part that made me sit very still when I saw it laid out. Because Patricia had done something I had not thought to do and could not have done without her resources. She had requested Ethan's credit card and bank records as part of the discovery process, and what those records showed was a spending pattern that made the source of the money unmistakable. The $12,000 withdrawal in August, made 3 days before Ethan booked a 2-week trip to Italy. Business class flights, 4-star hotels, a private tour of the Amalfi Coast. $2,300 on a single dinner, the charge description from a restaurant in Positano. The $6,000 withdrawal in November, 2 weeks before he purchased a watch. A specific Swiss-made watch that Patricia's paralegal had looked up. It retailed for $5,800. The $800 withdrawal in February, the one he'd made the same week I told him I wasn't feeling well. I had never asked him what that one was for. The credit card records told me. A spa weekend. He had taken $800 from my account the week I was sick and spent it on a weekend at a resort in the Hocking Hills. I sat across from Patricia's desk, and I looked at these documents, and I felt something that I don't have a clean name for. It wasn't just betrayal, because betrayal was something I had already processed, already moved through. This was something more specific. It was the particular devastation of seeing your suffering made concrete and small, of understanding that the week you skipped physical therapy to save co-pays, the week you stretched rice and beans across 5 dinners, the week you lay in bed sick with no one to call, in that same week, your son was at a spa, getting a massage, charging $800 to an account he'd accessed without your knowledge while you were home alone deciding which bill you could afford to pay. "Are you all right?" Patricia asked. "No," I said. "But go ahead." She went through the rest of it carefully. The legal framework, financial exploitation of an elderly adult under Ohio Revised Code, the civil remedies available, the potential for the judge to award not just restitution, but additional damages given the documentation of deliberate concealment. She was precise and thorough, and she spoke to me like an intelligent adult who deserved to understand exactly what she was walking into, which I appreciated more than I could say. "I want to ask you something," I said when she finished. "What is Ethan's attorney going to argue?" She laced her fingers on the desk. 3 main angles. First, that the investment account access was granted by you, explicitly or implicitly, through your course of conduct. Second, that you were aware of the withdrawals at the time they occurred and took no action to stop them, implying consent. Third, she paused. Third, they may try to argue diminished capacity, that you were not fully competent to manage your own financial affairs and that Ethan was acting as a caretaker. The room went very quiet. "Diminished capacity," I repeated. "It's a tactic," Patricia said, and her voice was careful but steady. "It's not a strong argument given the evidence, and the judge will see through it. But I want you prepared to hear it said out loud in a courtroom, because it will be said to make you feel small, and I need you to sit in that chair and not feel small." I thought about the woman I had been 8 weeks ago, standing in a grocery store parking lot listening to a recorded voice tell me I had $4.17. I thought about how far I had walked from that parking lot to this office, and every step I had taken without crawling to my son for help. I won't feel small, I said. I said it like I meant it, and I mostly did. Yes, the courthouse in Delwood County is an old building, limestone and wide steps, and the kind of interior that makes your footsteps echo. I had only been inside it twice before in my life, once for jury duty years ago, once for the probate of Gerald's will. Both times I had been a participant in something orderly and manageable. This time I was walking in as a plaintiff in a case against my own son, and the word plaintiff had a weight to it I hadn't anticipated. Helen drove me. Nathan met us on the steps. He had offered to come, and I had said I didn't need him there, and then 2 days later I had called him back and said, actually, I did. He hadn't said anything about the reversal. He had just said, I'll be there at 8:30. He was there at 8:15. I wore the navy blazer I had bought for Gerald's memorial service, which sounds morbid but was actually the nicest thing I owned, and I had my hair done at the salon on Marsden Street the day before. Helen's suggestion, and a good one, because sitting in that chair for an hour and a half, having someone take care of me in that small, specific way, did something to my spine. I walked in straighter. Ethan was already in the courtroom when we arrived. I had not seen him in 8 months, since that visit where I'd spent $200 on groceries and sent him home with a full refrigerator. He was wearing a gray suit I didn't recognize, expensive, and his hair was shorter than I remembered. He looked good. That was the first thing I noticed, and it landed somewhere painful because he always looked good, even when he was doing terrible things. And there was a time when that ease of his had made me proud. His attorney Douglas Farrell was beside him, a compact man in his 50s with reading glasses perched on his forehead and the practiced neutrality of someone paid to appear unruffled. Ethan looked up when I entered and our eyes met for a moment, and I watched something move across his face that I couldn't quite read. Not guilt, not openly. Something more complicated. Recognition, maybe. The look of a person seeing something they had convinced themselves was smaller than it actually was. I did not smile at him. I did not look away first. I sat down next to Patricia, and I put my hands flat on the table, and I breathed. The judge was the Honorable Carol Mack, a woman in her early 60s with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses that she wore low on her nose and peered over when she was paying close attention to something, which appeared to be most of the time. Patricia had told me Judge Mack had handled elder financial abuse cases before, and had a reputation for patience that ran out very quickly when she felt she was being played. I found this reassuring. The morning session opened with Farrell presenting Ethan's case, and Patricia had been exactly right about the 3 angles. The investment account access had been granted by me through a pattern of allowing Ethan to act on my behalf. I'd been aware of the transfers and had taken no contemporaneous action. And then the third, delivered in the smooth, measured tone of someone who had practiced it. The suggestion that my advanced age and the stress of recent bereavement had affected my ability to independently manage complex financial instruments. Advanced age. I was 65. I had managed complex financial instruments through 2 recessions, a spouse's death, a house purchase, and 30 years of medical billing. I sat in that chair and I did not react. Patricia had told me not to react, and I had promised her I wouldn't, and I kept that promise. But it cost me something to sit still while a man in a suit implied in a public courtroom that I was too old and confused to know where my own money had gone. What Farrell had not seen coming, and this I knew from Patricia's expression, a small controlled satisfaction she wore for the rest of the morning session, was the 62-page exhibit. Patricia presented it methodically, transaction by transaction, cross-referenced with Ethan's expenditures in the same period. The Italy trip, the watch, the spa weekend the week his mother was sick. She did not editorialize. She did not need to. The document spoke in the clearest language possible, numbers, dates, amounts, and Judge Mack read through each exhibit with the careful attention of someone who was building something in her mind and did not like what the shape of it was becoming. At one point, the judge looked up from the spa weekend documentation and looked at Ethan directly over her reading glasses. She did not say anything. She just looked at him for a long moment, and then she looked back down at the page. That look was worth more than a speech. Farrell tried to redirect. He introduced a set of text messages between me and Ethan from the previous year, selectively quoted, to suggest I had been aware of his financial activity and had expressed no objection. Patricia countered with the complete message thread, which showed, clearly, in Ethan's own words, in messages he had sent and had presumably forgotten about, that he had deliberately avoided any direct mention of specific amounts or accounts in our conversations, keeping everything vague enough to maintain plausible deniability while conducting specific, documented transactions. He was careful, Patricia told me later, during the lunch recess. He kept the language general on purpose. But careful people leave patterns, and patterns show up in records. Will it be enough? I asked. I think the judge already knows what she thinks, Patricia said. The afternoon session is going to tell us how Ethan handles pressure when there's no soft landing available. The afternoon session was when everything broke open. Ethan took the stand at 1:15. He had composed himself during the lunch recess into something that looked like calm, the kind of performance I recognized because I had watched him deploy it my whole life. The steady voice, the reasonable manner, the slightly wounded quality he could produce on demand that made people want to be gentle with him. He answered Farrell's questions carefully. He said the word caretaking 4 times in 12 minutes. He said he had been trying to protect my assets. He said he had been worried about me managing finances alone after Gerald's death, that he'd been trying to ensure security for my future. He was very good at it. I had forgotten, sitting across a courtroom from him, how good he was. Then Patricia stood up. She did not start with the financial records. She started with a single question. Mr. Hale, when was the last time you visited your mother's home? A pause. 8 months ago, approximately. And before that visit, when was the previous one? Another pause. 14 months before that. So in the 2-year period during which you were, as you've testified, concerned about your mother's ability to manage her own affairs, you visited her home twice. Farrell objected. The judge overruled it with a brevity that suggested she was interested in where this was going. During those same 2 years, Patricia continued, walking toward the exhibit stand, you made 11 withdrawals from your mother's investment account, totaling $43,200. Is that correct? Those funds were managed as Mr. Hale. Is the figure correct? Yes, he said, quietly. During that period, did you at any point use any portion of those funds to pay for your mother's medical expenses? Her prescriptions? Her physical therapy following knee surgery? Silence. Mr. Hale? No, he said. Did you contribute financially to her household in any way? Utilities, groceries, home maintenance? I brought groceries when I visited. The groceries that your mother paid for, Patricia said, and she held up a bank statement, using a credit card that she covered herself. Is that correct? He said nothing. Mr. Hale, I'm going to show you Exhibit 31. She placed a document in front of him. This is a credit card statement showing a charge of $2,317 at a restaurant in Positano, Italy, dated August 19th. The funds to cover this expenditure were drawn from your mother's investment account 3 days prior. Can you explain to the court what your mother received in return for that transaction? The courtroom was very quiet. Ethan looked at the document and he looked at Patricia and he looked, briefly, at me. And I watched him, across the room, run out of things to say. The reasonable manner, the steady voice, the slightly wounded quality, all of it ran out at the same moment, like a timer going off. What was underneath was something I had rarely seen on his face. Not anger, not calculation, something younger and rawer and less managed. He was 38 years old and he had just run out of things to say. And under all the suit and the performance and the careful language, he looked for a moment like the boy who used to stand in the kitchen doorway waiting to be told everything was going to be fine. I looked at him and I felt the old pull, the 38-year-old reflex to stand up and smooth things over, to say something that would make the look on his face go away. And then I sat with the feeling and let it pass through me without acting on it, the way you let a wave go through you in shallow water. It moved through me, and I was still sitting in the same chair on the same side of the room. Judge Mack asked Ethan to answer the question. She received nothing, he said. His voice was very quiet. The judge wrote something down. She wrote for a long time, longer than a short note, and the scratching of her pen in the silence was the loudest sound in the room. Then she looked up at both attorneys and said she was taking a 30-minute recess before closing arguments, and that she would have a ruling by end of business. Patricia put her hand briefly over mine as the courtroom began to move. "You okay?" she asked. I watched Ethan stand up from the witness stand and straighten his jacket with the automatic gesture of a man smoothing himself back together. And I thought about 38 years and $4.17 and a parking lot in October, and a bowl of lentil soup and a man who drove 2 hours with soup because I once said you look cold to a stranger. "Yes," I said. And this time I meant it completely. The judge came back in 47 minutes, not 30. Patricia said afterward that was a good sign, that she had taken the extra time to be precise, not because she was uncertain, but because she wanted the language of her ruling to be exact. What Judge Max said when she returned, I am going to carry with me for the rest of my life. She said, "The evidence presented in this proceeding demonstrates a clear, documented, and sustained pattern of financial exploitation. The defendant's testimony has not provided credible justification for any portion of the funds transferred. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff on all counts." All counts. I heard Patricia exhale beside me, and across the room I heard Douglas Farrell lean in close to Ethan and say something in a low voice, and I watched my son, my 38-year-old son in his expensive gray suit, put his face in his hands. Judge Mack's ruling did not feel the way I thought winning would feel. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect a certain kind of story. The wrong person gets justice. The music swells, the weight lifts, and everything that was broken snaps cleanly back into place. That is not what happened in the parking lot outside Delwood County Courthouse at 4:15 on a Thursday afternoon. What happened was that I sat in Helen's car for 10 minutes before I could move, not crying, not celebrating, just sitting with the strange, hollow feeling of something enormous being over. Patricia had walked me through the immediate next steps on the courthouse steps, brisk and clear the way she always was, while Nathan stood slightly back and Helen held my coat because I had forgotten I was holding it. The judge's ruling established full liability. Farrell had 48 hours to respond with either a payment plan proposal or a request for structured settlement negotiation. If Ethan failed to respond or attempted to delay, Patricia could move for asset seizure. The ruling also referred the matter to the county prosecutor's office for review of potential criminal charges under Ohio's elder abuse statutes, which meant that regardless of what happened with the civil settlement, Ethan was not entirely out of legal jeopardy yet. "That last part," I said. "The criminal referral. Does that mean—" "It means the prosecutor's office will review the file and decide whether to pursue charges independently," Patricia said. "It's out of my hands and out of yours at that point. It's also not unusual in cases with this level of documentation." I nodded. I processed that. My son might face criminal charges. I had not caused that. His own actions had caused it, and the law had its own momentum now. But I would be lying if I said there was no part of me that sat with that fact very uneasily. Nathan drove me home while Helen followed in her own car, and he was quiet in the way that he was often quiet. Not uncomfortable, not waiting for me to perform a particular emotion, just present. About halfway home he said, "How are you actually doing?" "I keep thinking about his face," I said, when Patricia asked him what I got in return for that restaurant dinner, the way he looked. "Yeah. I don't feel good about that," I said. "I know I should, maybe. I know what he did, but watching him sit there and not be able to answer, I didn't feel satisfied. I just felt tired and sad." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I don't think that makes you weak," he said. "I think it means you're a different kind of person than he is." I looked out the window at the November fields going past, flat and stripped in gray in the late afternoon light. "I raised him," I said. "He came from me. Somewhere along the way, something went badly wrong, and I was part of the environment that shaped him. I don't know how much of that is on me." "Rosemary." Nathan's voice was gentle but direct. "You can carry that question for the rest of your life if you want to. Or you can accept that you did your best with what you knew, that he is an adult who made choices, and that loving someone imperfectly doesn't make you responsible for what they become." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I fully believed it yet, but I tucked it away to look at again later, the way you tuck away something that might be true once you're ready to let it be. Farrell submitted a settlement proposal 36 hours after the ruling. I was at Patricia's office when she called me with the terms, and I sat across from her desk while she read through it and translated the legal language into plain words, the way she had done from the beginning. Ethan was proposing a structured repayment of the full amount, $54,200, over a period of 18 months, with the first payment of $10,000 due within 30 days. He was also proposing the removal of his name from any remaining joint financial instruments, the closing of his access to the investment account, and a legal agreement establishing that no further claims arising from the same set of transactions could be pursued. He's also proposing, Patricia said, setting the document down, that the matter of the criminal referral be addressed with a letter from you to the prosecutor's office stating that the civil matter has been resolved and that you do not wish to pursue additional legal action. I looked at her. Can I do that? Write that letter? You can write to the prosecutor expressing your position. It doesn't bind the prosecutor. They make their own decision. But it's a factor they consider. She paused. I want to be clear. That is entirely your choice. No one can tell you what to do with it. What would you do? I asked. Patricia considered that for a moment, and I appreciated that she didn't answer immediately. I would think about what you actually want, she said carefully. Not what he deserves. Not what would make other people feel like justice was done. What you need in order to close this chapter and move forward. I sat with that for the rest of the afternoon. The financial terms were acceptable. Patricia had already told me that full repayment over 18 months was a reasonable outcome given his income level, and that pushing for a faster timeline risked him defaulting and creating a new legal battle. The account separation was what I had wanted from the beginning, and the criminal referral question was the one I kept turning over, examining from different angles the way you examine something you already know the answer to but aren't quite ready to say out loud yet. I called Nathan that evening. I had started doing that, calling him when I needed to think through something out loud, because he listened the right way. He asked questions instead of giving answers, mostly, and he didn't tell me what he thought I should feel. If I write the letter, I said, it's not because I'm protecting him. I want to be clear about that. It's not because I'm folding or going back to being the person who excused everything. I know, Nathan said. It's because I'm 65 years old and I have spent enough of my life inside this situation. A criminal prosecution could take 2 more years. Depositions, hearings, all of it. And at the end of it, he would either go to jail or he wouldn't, and either way, I would have given 2 more years of my life to it. I paused. I want to start living. I want to stop spending every day inside this. Then that's your answer, Nathan said. It feels like letting him off. It's not letting him off. He's paying back $54,000. He has a civil judgment against him. His employer knows the referral to the prosecutor is public record regardless of whether charges are pursued. He is going to live with the consequences of what he did for a long time. A pause. The question isn't whether he pays. He pays either way. The question is how much more of yourself you spend on it. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear and the kitchen quiet around me and the old oak tree visible through the window in the dark, just the shape of it against the slightly lighter sky. I'm going to write the letter, I said. Okay. And then I'm done, I said, with all of it, with being inside it. Okay, he said again, and his voice was warm and steady and exactly what I needed it to be. I signed the settlement agreement on a Friday morning, 11 days after the ruling. Patricia walked me through every page, which took nearly 2 hours. And I read each section carefully instead of just signing where she pointed, which she approved of. When it was done, my signature at the bottom of the last page, the date written in my own handwriting, she shook my hand across the desk with both of hers, which was not her usual manner, and she said, "You were a very good client, Rosemary. You did everything right." "I had a very good attorney," I said. She smiled and pushed her glasses up. The first thing I did after leaving Patricia's office was drive to the bank. Not the bank where the joint account had been. I had already closed that relationship entirely. But a different institution, a credit union on the east side of Delwood that Nathan had recommended, where I had opened 2 new accounts in my name only, with no secondary holders and no authorized agents, just mine. The account manager was a young woman named Sonia, who was professional and unhurried, and who set me up with online access and a new card and walked me through every security feature with genuine patience. When we were done, she asked if there was anything else she could help with, and I said no, and I walked out into the November air with a new card in my wallet and no one else's name on my money for the first time in 7 years. I sat in the parking lot and I felt something that took me a moment to identify because it had been so long since I'd felt it clearly. Safe. I felt safe. Not happy, not triumphant, just the simple, quiet fact of safety. My money was mine. No one could reach into it. No one was waiting for a moment of my inattention to drain it down to $4.17. Whatever happened from here, whatever the next season of my life looked like, it would be built on a foundation that belonged entirely to me. I drove home, and I made myself a real dinner for the first time in months. Not canned beans, not stretched rice, but an actual meal, chicken and roasted vegetables and bread from the bakery on Marsden Street. And I ate it at my kitchen table without counting the cost. The first repayment installment arrived on the 31st day, which was 1 day before the contractual deadline. Patricia's office notified me when it cleared, $10,000. I sat with that notification on my phone, and I thought about what $10,000 would have meant 3 months ago when I was choosing between the gas bill and the pharmacy. Now it was the first piece of something being returned to me. Not a gift, not a gesture, but an accounting. A debt being paid because a judge had looked at the evidence and said, "This is what you owe." The money was real and it mattered. I won't pretend otherwise, but the money was never the whole point. Nathan came for dinner that same week. I invited him, which felt significant in a way I was still figuring out. He brought wine, I made pot roast, and we sat at the kitchen table and talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with courts or attorneys or financial records. He told me about his childhood in Delwood, the years he'd struggled, the people who had and hadn't helped him along the way. I told him about Gerald, the real Gerald, not the sanitized memorial version, but the man who left his socks on the bathroom floor and cried at baseball games and once drove 4 hours in the wrong direction on a road trip because he refused to admit the map was right and he was wrong. Nathan laughed at that story. A real laugh, the kind that changes a person's whole face. "He sounds like he was a good man," Nathan said. "He was a very human one," I said. "Which is better, I think." We talked about what I was going to do next, not in a pressured way. Nathan never pushed, which was one of the things about him that I had come to appreciate deeply. He asked because he was interested, not because he thought I needed a plan. I had been thinking about the community garden on the south side of Delwood that had been trying to get funding for 2 years. I had been thinking about the evening art class at the community center that I had looked at every semester for 4 years and talked myself out of every time for reasons I couldn't quite remember now. I had been thinking about my granddaughter Lily. Lily was Ethan's daughter from a relationship that had ended before she was 3. She was now 9 years old, and she lived with her mother, Kara, about 40 minutes from Delwood. Kara and I had always gotten along in the cautious, careful way of women connected by a child who is not quite a bridge between them. During the worst months, I had pulled back from Lily because I couldn't explain what was happening in words a 9-year-old should hear, and because every connection to Ethan's world felt dangerous while everything was still raw and unresolved. But Lily had sent me a card. It arrived while the settlement was still being finalized, a handmade card on yellow construction paper with flowers drawn in marker around the edges, and her handwriting inside, careful and slightly uneven the way 9-year-olds write when they are trying very hard. "Dear Grandma Rosie," it said, "Mama said you were having a hard time. I made you this. I hope you feel better soon. I love you no matter what. Love, Lily. I love you no matter what." I had sat with that card for a long time. I still had it on my refrigerator, held up with a magnet from a vacation I took with Gerald 15 years ago. Every morning when I got up and went to the kitchen, the yellow paper was the first thing I saw. I told Nathan about it. He listened carefully. "You should call her," he said. "Call Kara. Don't wait for things to be fully resolved or fully healed or fully anything. Just call." "I know," I said. 9 years old is a long time to wait for a grandmother, he said, not harshly, just truly. I called Kara the next morning. The conversation was awkward in the opening minutes, the way conversations are when you have let too much time pass. But Kara was generous in the way she had always been generous, straightforward and without performance. She said Lily asked about me regularly. She said she had told Lily that Grandma Rosie was dealing with some grown-up things and would be in touch when she could. She said, carefully, "I know what Ethan did, Rosemary. Not all the details, but enough. I'm sorry you went through that." I said I appreciated it. I said I wanted to see Lily, if Kara was comfortable with it. She said, of course, and we set a date for the following Saturday. What? That Saturday, Lily ran across Kara's front yard and hit me at approximately hip height, both arms around my waist, her face pressed into my coat. I had forgotten, genuinely forgotten, in all the months of hard things, what it felt like to be held by a child who was not performing affection, but simply having it, the way children do before the world teaches them to be careful with their feelings. I held her back and I closed my eyes, and I stood in that front yard for a long moment and just held my granddaughter. We spent the afternoon doing what Lily wanted to do, which involved a complicated board game I didn't fully understand, a documentary about octopuses that she had apparently watched 4 times already and narrated along with, and a walk to the small pond behind Kara's neighborhood, where Lily threw bread crusts at ducks, with the focused intensity of someone completing an important task. At one point, sitting on the bench by the pond while Lily argued with a particularly aggressive mallard over the last piece of bread, she looked over at me and said without preamble, "Grandma Rosie, are you going to be okay?" I looked at her. 9 years old, Gerald's jawline softened into something rounder and gentler, her eyes very serious and very direct, the way the eyes of honest children always are. "Yes," I said, "I really am." "Good," she said, with the finality of someone checking something off a list. Then she turned back to the mallard and said, "This one is rude, Grandma." And I laughed, and it was the most uncomplicated laugh I had produced in months. On the drive home, I thought about what Nathan had said, that 9 years old is a long time to wait for a grandmother. He was right, and I had lost time with her that I could not get back, and that was a cost of everything that had happened, a real cost that didn't show up in the financial records Patricia had assembled. Some things the court could not return to me. The months I had been too absorbed in survival to be present for Lily were gone. They were gone, and I had to carry that and let it make me more deliberate going forward, not more guilty. Because guilt without action is just self-punishment, and I'd punished myself enough for long enough for things that were not entirely mine to carry. The second installment came on time. So did the third. Ethan was paying, steadily, on schedule, the way you pay a debt when the alternative has been made very clear to you. Patricia checked in monthly to confirm the transfers were clearing. We did not communicate beyond that. Not Ethan and I. Not yet. There was a silence between us that I had chosen deliberately, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I was not ready. I was not going to pretend to be ready because someone expected me to be. Nathan and I had dinner twice more in November, and once I drove to Cleveland to have lunch near his office, which was the first time I had gone anywhere for something that was just for me, not a medical appointment, not an errand, in longer than I could easily remember. His office was on the 14th floor of a glass building with a view of Lake Erie that was gray and enormous and somehow calming. We ate sandwiches and talked about the community garden and about a trip he was planning to Portugal in the spring, and at one point he said carefully that he would like it if I considered coming along. I looked at him. Not as... He set down his sandwich. I realized that came out less clearly than I intended. It came out clearly enough, I said. He looked at me. And I think, I said slowly, that I am not ready for anything that requires me to know what I want yet. I have spent a very long time not knowing what I want because I was too busy managing what other people needed. I need some time to be just alone with myself, to find out what's there. He nodded. Not wounded, not pushed away, just accepting it the way a person accepts a true thing. But, I said, ask me again in the spring. He smiled. I'll do that. I drove home from Cleveland in the late afternoon with the gray lake behind me and the highway opening up ahead and the radio on low and nobody waiting for me to be anything in particular. My account was mine, my house was mine, my time was mine. For 65 years, I had been someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's employee. I had shaped myself around other people's needs so consistently and for so long that I had genuinely lost track of where they ended and I began. The process of finding out what was actually left, what was purely, originally, only mine, was not going to be quick or easy or clean, but it was going to happen. I turned the radio up and I drove, and for the first time in a very long time, I was not afraid of what came next. Spring came slowly that year, the way spring comes in Ohio. Not all at once, not with any particular fanfare, but in small incremental surrenders of cold. First the mud, then the crocuses along the south side of my house that I had planted the year Gerald died, and had somehow survived every winter since without much help from me. Then one morning I woke up, and the light coming through the bedroom curtains had a different quality to it, something warmer and more horizontal. And I lay there for a few minutes before getting up, and I thought, for the first time in a long time without immediately feeling guilty about it, that I was glad to be alive. That is not a small thing. I want to say that clearly. After everything that had happened, after the parking lot and the $4 and the beans and the legal pad and the courtroom and the settlement and the long, quiet months of rebuilding, waking up and feeling genuinely glad to be alive was not something I took for granted. It was something I noticed and held and said thank you for in my own quiet way. By March, the community garden project had become something real. I had joined the planning committee in January. Helen had dragged me to the first meeting by mentioning there would be coffee, and then conveniently not mentioning there would also be a 2-hour organizational discussion. And by March, I was running the volunteer coordination, which was either a natural development or an ambush, depending on how you looked at it. There were 11 of us, ranging from a retired school teacher named Dwight, who had very strong opinions about soil acidity, to a 26-year-old named Priya, who filmed everything on her phone and had gotten us 43 followers on an account I barely understood. We broke ground on the first weekend in March, in a vacant lot on Clover Street that the city had finally approved for use, and I stood in the cold with a shovel in my hands and dirt on my boots and felt something that I had to identify slowly because it had been absent for so long. Purpose. Plain, uncomplicated purpose that had nothing to do with being useful to a son who did not appreciate it. The art class at the community center had started in February. I was terrible at it, which nobody had warned me about adequately. I had imagined I might have some latent talent that just needed encouragement. What I actually had was enthusiasm and very poor spatial reasoning, and my first 3 attempts at still life drawing looked like the objects had been rendered by someone describing them over the phone to someone else who had also never seen them. The instructor, a patient man named Oliver, who was approximately 30 years old and had the gentle manner of someone who had taught many hopeless adults, told me in week 4 that I had an interesting relationship with proportion. I laughed so hard I had to put down my charcoal. But I kept going. Every Tuesday evening, bad drawings and all, because the point was never the drawings. Bog. Nathan asked me again in April, as he had said he would. We were walking along the towpath trail on the east side of Delwood. It had become a regular thing Saturday mornings when his schedule allowed, which was not every Saturday, but enough that I had started thinking of it as a rhythm rather than an event. The trail runs along an old canal bed, and in April it is lined with wildflowers and the occasional confused goose, and it is one of the places in Delwood that makes you understand why people stay in small towns their whole lives. I'm going to Portugal in May, he said. 3rd week. Lisbon, and then the Alentejo region for a few days. He paused. I would like you to come. I had been thinking about this since November. I had thought about it more than I wanted to admit, turning it over in the quiet hours, examining it from all sides. Nathan was a good man, one of the genuinely good ones, the kind who had been forged by hard things and come out softer rather than harder, which is rarer than it should be. Whatever was growing between us was real and careful, and neither of us was in a hurry to define it in ways it wasn't ready for yet. But I was also 65 years old and newly in possession of myself, maybe for the first time in my adult life. And there was a version of saying yes to Portugal that was about joy, and a version that was about not being alone, and I needed to know which one I was operating from. I need to ask you something first, I said. All right. Are you asking me because you want company or because you're worried about me? He stopped walking. He turned to look at me with the expression of someone who has been asked a question that deserves a real answer and intends to give one. I'm asking you, he said, because I have more fun when you're there, because you notice things I miss, and you say what you think, and you make me laugh in ways I didn't know I still could. He paused. It has nothing to do with worry. You are the least worrying person I know. I looked at him for a moment. That's a good answer, I said. Is it a yes? It's a yes, I said. We kept walking, and the geese were unreasonable, and the wildflowers were doing their best, and I did not feel the need to say anything else about it for a while, which was one of the things I had come to understand about Nathan, that being with him did not require constant maintenance. It could just exist. The call from Ethan came in April, not from his attorney, from him directly. A Sunday afternoon, his name on my screen, and I sat with the phone in my hand for 3 rings before I answered. Mom. His voice was different from the call after he'd been served. That call had been pressured and tight, the voice of a man managing a situation. This was quieter, more careful. Ethan, I said, I'm not calling about anything legal. Patricia's office has everything. A pause, a long one. I've been seeing someone, a therapist, since January. I said nothing. I waited. She keeps asking me to think about what I actually wanted, when all of this happened, what I thought I was doing. Another pause. I've been thinking about it for 3 months, and I don't have a clean answer. I don't have a reason that makes what I did okay, because there isn't one. No, I said quietly. There isn't. I told myself you didn't need it, the money, that you were fine, that you'd be fine, that it was just sitting there. His voice tightened. That's not what I actually believed. I knew better. I just wanted the thing, and I found a way to let myself take it. I was sitting in my kitchen, the same chair I'd sat in every hard night of the past 6 months, and I was listening to my son say out loud something I had waited a long time to hear. Not because hearing it changed what had happened, it didn't, but because the absence of it had been its own kind of wound. I know, I said. I know you knew better. I'm sorry, Mom. The words came out unpolished, not rehearsed, the way genuine things sound when they've been held inside long enough to lose their performance quality. Not sorry I got caught, sorry I did it, sorry I did all of it. The years before the money too, the birthdays, the hospital, when you were sick and I didn't call back, all of it. I sat with that. Here is what I need to tell you, because I think this is the part people expect to be simple, and it was not simple at all. I had imagined this conversation many times in many versions over the past months. In some versions, I had things to say that were hard and precise and would make him understand exactly what he had cost me. In other versions, I had nothing to say at all, just silence, the boundary held firm, the door closed. What I actually felt, sitting there listening to him, was something I hadn't predicted. Not forgiveness exactly, not the sudden dissolving of everything that had happened, but something more specific and more manageable than I expected. I believed him, not completely, not without reservation. He was in therapy, which was something, but therapy does not automatically make a person changed. It just makes them aware, and awareness and change are different stations on the same line. The road between where he had been and where he needed to be was long, and I had no way of knowing how far he would actually travel it. But I believed, in that moment, that he meant what he was saying, and that mattered, even if it wasn't everything. I hear you, I said. I'm not ready to tell you everything is fine. It isn't fine yet, but I hear you. Yeah. His voice was rough. That's more than I expected. Ethan, I paused. Lily sent me a card. In January. Did you know she did that? A small silence. No. She wrote that she loved me no matter what. She's 9 years old and she understood something that took you 38 years to get close to. I said it without cruelty, just as fact. I've been seeing her. Kara has been very generous about that. Lily is remarkable. She is, he said, and his voice broke slightly on those two words in a way that told me, maybe more than anything else he'd said, that the therapy was doing something real. He loved his daughter. That had always been true. Whatever had curdled in him over the years had not reached that. When you're further along, I said carefully, and when I'm further along, maybe we can figure out what's possible between us. I'm not closing that door permanently, but I'm also not opening it all the way, not yet. I understand, he said. The payments are coming through, I said. Patricia confirms them each month. When the last one clears, I want you to know. I'm not keeping score past that point. What was taken is being returned. What we do after that is something different, and it starts from zero. A long silence. Then, okay. Take care of yourself, I said, and keep going to therapy. I hung up and I put the phone down on the table, and I sat in the quiet of my kitchen for a long time. Not processing exactly, more like absorbing. The way you sit after something significant has passed through, and you are checking to see what is still standing. Helen knocked 20 minutes later. Her timing remained uncanny. How are you? She said, coming in without waiting, because that was Helen. My son called, I said. He apologized. She sat down across from me. Real apology or managing apology? I think real, I said, with room for error. She nodded slowly. What are you going to do with it? Keep it, I said. Hold it carefully. See what it grows into. I paused. Not rush it. Not perform forgiveness I haven't actually finished building yet. Helen looked at me for a moment. You know, she said, 6 months ago you wouldn't have known to say that. She was right. 6 months ago I would have either accepted the apology completely and immediately, swallowing everything to restore peace the way I had always swallowed everything, or I would have rejected it entirely, because the wound was still too raw to see around. What I was doing now was something I had not previously been capable of, holding the complexity, allowing something to be real and partial at the same time, saying, I believe you and I need more time without those two things canceling each other out. That was new. Hard won and new. And the last repayment installment cleared on a Thursday in September. Patricia called me herself rather than emailing, which was unusual. It's done, she said simply. Account fully settled, all obligations met. I thanked her for everything she had done, every phone call and document, an hour of careful work, the way she had spoken to me like an adult who deserved to understand her own case. She said it had been genuinely satisfying work. I believed her. I went to the investment account that afternoon, and I looked at the balance for a long time. It was not what it had been before everything happened. The interest it had lost, the opportunity cost of 14 months of unauthorized withdrawals, these were things that had been returned in dollars, but could not be fully restored in terms of time and growth. That was a real loss. I sat with the reality of it without minimizing it and without letting it swallow everything else. Then I called Nathan. It's done, I said. How does it feel? I thought about that. Like standing in a room after you've cleaned it properly for the first time in years, I said. You see all the space that was always there. You just couldn't see it before because of everything piled in it. He laughed softly. That's a good way to put it. I want to do something to mark it, I said. Not a party, not anything big, just something intentional. I have an idea, he said, if you trust me. I told him I did. That Saturday, he drove to Delwood and picked me up, and we drove 40 minutes north to a state park I had not been to since Gerald and I took Ethan there when he was 7 years old. There's a ridge trail that ends at an overlook above a river valley, and in September the trees are just beginning to turn, the first hesitant suggestions of orange and gold at the edges of the canopy, while everything else is still green. We hiked up in the late afternoon and sat on the rock at the top and looked out over the valley in the low-angled light. I brought something, Nathan said. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced, somewhat improbably, 2 slightly squashed pieces of bakery chocolate that he had wrapped carefully in wax paper. It's not champagne, he said, but the wine would have been terrible after the hike. I took a piece and I held it, and I looked out at the valley, the river catching the light, the trees making their slow turn toward autumn, the enormous ordinary fact of the world continuing to exist and be beautiful regardless of everything. And I thought about who I had been a year ago. A woman standing in a grocery store parking lot with $4.17 and a son who was waiting for her to beg. And who I was now. A woman on a ridge with dirt under her fingernails from a community garden and bad still life drawings on her refrigerator, and a granddaughter who loved her no matter what, and a man who brought chocolate on a hike because he knew what she actually needed. A woman whose money was her own, whose name was on her own accounts, whose remaining years belonged to her to spend as she chose. Nathan, I said, yeah, thank you for all of it. The soup and the attorney and the phone calls and the... I stopped. For showing up. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, thank you for letting me. We sat up there until the light went completely, and the valley turned to shadow, and the first stars came out over the tree line, and then we hiked back down in the dark with our phone flashlights because neither of us had thought to bring actual flashlights, which Nathan said was a planning failure, and I said was a metaphor, and he said for what? And I said for the whole last year, feeling your way in the dark until you find the trail again. And he said that was either very profound or a little dramatic, and I said probably both, and we were still arguing about it when we got back to the car. I'm Mom. I want to talk to you now. Not as Rosemary, the character in a story, but as a voice that has been through something and wants to leave you with what it found on the other side. Because if you have stayed with me through all of this, through the grocery store and the $4 and the legal pad and the courtroom and the slow rebuilding, then you deserve more than just an ending. You deserve to know what any of it actually means. Here's what I learned. Love is not a debt that gets paid by suffering. I spent decades believing that if I loved hard enough, sacrificed enough, excused enough, bent myself into small enough shapes, that love would be returned in proportion. That is not how love works. Love given out of fear of losing someone is not love freely offered, and the person receiving it learns nothing from it except that you can be taken for granted. I did not love Ethan wrong, but I loved him in ways that cost me and taught him nothing, and I should have drawn lines long before the lines were drawn for me by a bank balance and a declined card at a grocery store. Your assets are your dignity. I know that sounds cold, but here's what I mean. When I had no money, I had no power. When I had no power, I had no voice. The money itself was never the point. It was what the money represented, which was my right to exist on my own terms. My pension, my savings, my 30 years of careful work. These were not just numbers. They were the accumulated evidence of my own worth, my own labor, my own choices. When Ethan took them, he was not just taking money. He was taking my ability to say no. He was taking my right to leave. He was taking the material foundation of my own independence. Every older adult has the right to protect that foundation, not as greed, not as selfishness, as basic, non-negotiable self-respect. Kindness given without expectation comes back. Nathan Carter walked into my life because of $20 and a sentence I said on a cold morning 30 years ago that I had completely forgotten. I was not kind to him because I expected a return. I was kind because it cost me nothing, and he needed it. And 30 years later, when I needed it, it came back. Not because the universe is perfectly just, but because kindness changes people. And changed people sometimes find their way back to the person who changed them. You cannot count on this. You cannot be kind strategically and expect the accounting to balance. But you can be kind anyway, and occasionally, when you least expect it, it matters more than you could ever calculate. Setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of truth. When I hung up on Ethan after he was served, when I refused to write a letter saying things that weren't true, when I sat in a courtroom and let the evidence speak without softening it to protect him, I was not being a bad mother. I was being an honest one. For the first time, perhaps, in a very long time. The kindest thing you can do for someone who has been hurting you is refuse to continue letting them do it. Not because punishment is the goal, because truth is the only ground anything real can grow from, and you cannot build a genuine relationship on a foundation of one person's perpetual surrender. And finally, this one is the hardest and the most important. It is never too late to find out who you are when you stop being defined by someone else's needs. I was 65 years old before I sat at a kitchen table and wrote down, honestly, what had been done to me. 65 before I walked into an attorney's office and said this was wrong and I will not accept it. 65. Before I stood in a community garden with muddy boots, or sat in a class making terrible drawings, or walked a ridge trail at sunset eating squash chocolate next to someone who made me laugh. 65. And it was not too late. It is not too late for you either. Whatever age you are, whatever has been taken from you, whatever shape you have bent yourself into to keep someone else comfortable, you have not run out of time to straighten up. The room is still there. It still has space in it. You just have to clear it out and stand in it and let yourself see what has always been yours. I am Rosemary Hale. I am 65 years old. I have a community garden and bad drawings on my refrigerator and a granddaughter who loves me no matter what, and a life that belongs entirely to me. I was betrayed by someone I loved completely, and I rose anyway. So can you.